culturally responsive engagement and partnership.
All right. Well, I see that folks are joining. We have quite a number of participants already with us, so welcome everybody to the Culturally Responsive Engagement and Partnership Planning for Action session. My name is Madison Sandoval Lunn, and I will be one of 3 speakers during today's session. Chào mọi người, tên của con là Beth Thanh. Cảm ơn mọi người đã đến nhà hôm nay. I just said welcome to you all in my native tongue and introduce my Vietnamese name, Thanh, and also thank you all for joining us today. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm on the land of the Nuuvi, the Southern Paiute people. The Tuduni, or the desert people, are the ancestors of the Las Vegas Paiute tribe. Prior to colonialism, their territory spanned across what is today southeastern California, southern Nevada, northern Arizona, and southern Utah. Both myself and my fellow speakers today will give you all just a little bit about our cultural background to give you a sense of where it is that we're coming from in leading today's session. I identify as Asian American first generation. I am born from a mother who is half Vietnamese and half Black, a product of the Vietnam War. I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, raised in Chicago, Illinois, and ended up in Southern California, in which I entered the foster care system. And during a prime time of my cultural formation or identity formation, I was raised by predominantly Mexican and Hispanic households, which has shaped my cultural identity. I'm going to be turning it over to Alan to introduce himself. Alan?
Bonjour, everyone. Hi, yes, my name is Alan Rabidou. Currently, I work as the Youth and Family Engagement Specialist for the National Native Children's Trauma Center out of the University of Montana. I identify myself as Native American or Anishinaabe. Bonjour, Jawana de Nini Dijnakas, Bawating Anishinaabe, Kandunjaba, Bang Dotem, Benijiko Kwejan Kazo. My introduction in our tribal language. I live in northern Michigan. I'm a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. Although my father was non-native, my mother was full-blooded Ojibwe from Garden River, Canada. So I'm an enrolled citizen here of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians and live in our original territory here around the Great Lakes area. Crystal.
Thanks, Alan. Hi, everyone. My name is Surya y bienvenidos a todos. Me llamo Cristal y me alegro que están aquí con nosotros hoy. I just said thank you for being here, and I'm really happy that you all are joining us here today. I do want to begin with my land acknowledgement as well. I was in New Jersey, and that land belonged to the Munsee Naalapi tribe, and prior to the colonialism, their territory spanned across parts of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York. For me and my cultural background, I am half Colombian and half Irish American. I was born and raised in New Jersey, where I spent all of my foster care experience here. And even though I grew up in more of a Hispanic household, throughout my time in foster care, I grew up in an African American community. So I thank you all for being here today, and I'll pass it back over to Madison to go over our objectives.
Thank you, Crystal. And Crystal will be dropping down a link that you all can use to figure out where it is that you are on, which land, tribal land you're currently residing on. And if that is a practice that you want to engage in as you're doing this work, we welcome you to do so. The session learning objectives today is we'll be doing a little bit of definition, but we're welcoming you all to engage with us and participate in helping us to define some of these terms. We will also explore the continuum of cultural competency as we talk about how do we make next strides in evolving this work. And then we'll wrap up with some small group discussion and hoping that you all will identify some strategies and action steps to enhance cultural responsiveness in your engagement practice, especially with those with lived experience. I'll be turning it over to Crystal.
Thanks, Madison. So like Madison said, a lot of the session is going to be partly engaging in the chat, where we want you all to be able to provide your answers. So as you see on the screen, please put your answer in the chat on how do you define culture, or feel free to find a definition that resonates with you and drop that into the chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to Alan for you to provide your own thoughts on how you define culture. Alan.
Thank you, Crystal. Oh man, culture. So again, as I said, I'm Anishinaabe or Native American. So when I think about my culture, I think about things like how we all introduced ourselves in our native language. We have languages, we have ceremony and practices that we learned growing up, or that I learned growing up. There were stories, how, where we came from, our creation stories. But even so, then I think also for me, it's been a lifelong learning. What does it mean to be Anishinaabe? So what are our values, or what is it that I'm supposed to portray as an Anishinaabe man? And I feel like I've learned that over the years and work really hard to always kind of portray that. So there's so much to culture when I hear that word.
Thank you, Alan. I really appreciate that. And I see a lot of things coming through the chat. For me, I really think, culture is something unique and different for oneself, and it really contributes to making that person who they are. I see a lot of surface level aspects and some deep surface aspects that we're going to continue to talk about throughout this presentation, but I see shared values, morals, core beliefs, traditions, food, and identity. So we really appreciate all these answers and keep them coming throughout the session. One of the biggest things, and one of the reasons why we asked this, right, and as you see on the next slide, the different definition of cultures. Everyone can have a different definition of culture. So we pulled out 3 of them here today. One from the Merriam-Webster that talks about that defines culture as customary beliefs, social norms, shared values and attitudes, instead of social practices. The American Sociological Association defines culture as languages, customs, beliefs, rules, and arts, knowledge, and collective identities. And so on, as you see, the Social Work Dictionary defines it as customs, habits, skills, technologies, arts, and behavior of a group of people in a specific time period. So as we go on to talk about culture, just know that culture can mean different to everyone, and we want you to speak from the place of what culture means to you.
Thanks, Crystal. And I think one thing that you all may be noticing is that a lot of times people define culture as related to the aspects of culture that's most important to them. And so folks have already been doing this, which is already kind of throwing into the chat what are some aspects of culture that is important to them. Continue to put some of those aspects into the chat. And I'm going to turn it over to Alan really quickly to talk about an aspect of culture that's important to him.
I mentioned before that although I'm not, like I said, a fluid speaker of my language, unfortunately, language has been such an important aspect. Because one thing I've learned about our language is, I've always been told our language is a strength-based language. There's really no way to say something mean or negative about somebody. So I think about particularly when you interact with the Anishinaabe people or my relatives, taking a strength-based focus is kind of what we consider to be more culturally congruent with the way we do things. So really focusing on, the fact that we're resilient rather than all of our troubles that we have.
Thank you, Alan. I'm seeing some really more aspects. I welcome folks to throw into the chat what is a cultural aspect of your life that's really important. That's really important to kind of expose us to the different cultures that folks are coming in with today. And I agree with Alan, language is a really important aspect of my culture. My native tongue is Vietnamese, lost through my entry into the foster care system. But in my language, whenever I greet someone or I speak to someone, I always refer to them as a relative, either as a G or a M or a Gong or a Ba. And all of this words just means like aunt, uncle, younger sibling, older sibling. And so it really shapes the way I see other people and seeing them as relatives rather than as strangers. And that's an important aspect to me in thinking about how my culture and my language. I'm seeing folks are listing, again, more pieces around like, culture can look different in different households, more items related to institutions and food. Again, some of these aspects of culture is important consideration. So what we're going to introduce to you now really quickly is a cultural iceberg. So this iceberg was really Edward Hall, who was an anthropologist, was noted with concepting this idea of culture is 10% what is visible, and then 90% not very clearly visible to most people. And so you can see here, there is surface culture elements as well as deep culture elements. And for those of you who are squinting, I promise we will zoom in. You'll get to see the whole picture in just a second. So surface culture is some of the things that we're seeing in the chat right now. It includes things that we can visibly see. It could be behaviors, traditions, folklore, art, language, religion, history, heroes, food, dance.
Other
These are
elements of
things that
surface
we can
culture
readily
include fashion,
identify,
flags, games,
oftentimes
holidays,
attributed to
sports,
one or more
architecture,
cultures.
literature,
So
music,
take a
and
moment to
clothes.
see if there's any other surface culture things that you're aware of that's not on here that should be, and feel free to throw those into the chat. Give folks about a minute or so. Entertainment. Yep. Thank you, Carrie. That's a really great one. What are some other things that belong in surface culture that's not on this iceberg? Milestones. Thank you, Tatet. Symbols, faith. Thank you. Kin networks. Thank you, Claudette. Thank you. As folks are welcome to continue to enter in more surface culture items. And then here's deep cultures. And deep culture there's two levels. There's one that is around our beliefs and our attitudes and our value systems. And there's another level that is then displayed through our behaviors and actions. So you can see in deep cultures is pretty wide. There's a lot of elements to consider. It's things like attitudes towards cooperation versus competition, towards generational differences, how one sees dependence, health, well-being, death, community, money, wealth, and authority. It includes concepts of such as things like fairness, justice, past, future, trauma, respect, beauty, modesty, even roles related to age, sex, gender, class, and family. And it affects our approaches to things like child and elder care, courtship, marriage, rites of passage, decision-making, problem solving, parenting practices, as well as handling things like conflict.
Other elements of deep culture include approaches to religion, arrangement of physical space, healthcare, and work-life balance, attitudes toward work, nature, foreigners, war and peace, education, receiving and seeking help, and medical care, concepts of courtesy, manners, success, duty, self, time, fear, morals, hygiene, friendship, leadership, and social hierarchy, and communication styles and rules such as tone of voice, eye contact, humor, language, personal space, and touching.
And not every culture will address every aspect of this, but it's just an important consideration. Oh, someone noted social norms and personal space. Yes, those are also really key considerations. All right. So folks are welcome to continue engaging and identifying other items or aspects related to surface and deep culture. And I'm going to be turning it over to Crystal. You're on mute.
Yeah, always. You know, at least once throughout the presentation, somebody has to be on mute. So as you're seeing in front of you, it's good to think about what you're seeing in front of you is a continuum of cultural competency. So the first one is cultural destructiveness, and is characterized by attitudes, policies, structures, and practices within a system or organization that are destructive to a cultural group. It's a system which adheres to this extreme, and it assumes that one race is superior and should eradicate the lesser cultures because of their perceived subhuman position.
Other characteristics include forced assimilation, subjugation, and rights and privileges only for the dominant group.
They remove children of color from their families on the basis of race, or purposefully risk the well-being of minority individuals in social or medical experiments without their knowledge or consent. Bigotry coupled with vast power differentials allow the dominant group to disenfranchise, control, exploit, or systematically destroy the minority populations. The next one is cultural incapacity, and it's systems or agencies that do not intentionally seek to be culturally destructive, but rather lack the capacity to help minority clients or communities. The system remains extremely biased, believes in the racial superiority of the dominant group, and assumes a paternal posture towards lesser races. These agencies may disproportionately apply resources, discriminate against people of color on the basis of whether they know their place and believe in the supremacy of dominant culture helpers. They may act as agents of oppression by enforcing racist policies and maintaining stereotypes. And such agencies are often characterized by ignorance and unrealistic fear of people of color. Characteristics include discriminatory hiring practices, subtle messages to people of color that they are not valued or welcome, and generally lower expectations of minority clients. And the third one that I'm going to go over before I turn it back over to Madison is cultural blindness. And it's systems and agencies that provide services with the express philosophy of being unbiased. To function with the belief that color or culture makes no difference and that the people are all the same. Culturally blind agencies characterized by the belief that helping approaches traditionally used by the dominant culture are universally applicable if the system worked as it should. All people, regardless of race or culture, would be served with equal effectiveness. Such services ignore cultural strengths, encourage assimilation, and blame the victim for their problems. These agencies occasionally hire minority staff, but tend to be motivated by their own needs than by the understanding of the needs of the client and the community. While these agencies often view themselves as unbiased and responsive to minority needs, their ethnocentrism is reflected in attitude, policy, and practice.
Thanks, Crystal. I'll take care of the last three. The next one being cultural pre-competence. And this pre-competent agency realizes its weaknesses in serving minorities and attempts to improve some aspect of their services to a specific population. They are characterized by the desire to deliver quality services and a commitment to civil rights. They respond to the minority community's cry for improved services by asking, what can we do? An agency may believe that the accomplishment of one goal or activity fulfills their obligation to the minority communities, or on the other hand, they may undertake an activity that fails and are reluctant to try again. Agencies sometimes hire one or more, usually assimilated minority workers, and feel that they are equipped to meet the need. Minority professionals, like all other professionals, need training on the function of culture and its impact on client populations. The next level being cultural competence, and culturally competent agencies are characterized by acceptance and respect for difference, continuing self-assessment regarding culture, and careful attention to the dynamics of difference, continuous expansion of cultural knowledge and resources, and a variety of adaptation to service models in order to better meet the needs of minority populations. They work to hire unbiased employees, seek advice and consultation from minority community, and actively decide what they are and are not capable of providing to the minority community. They understand the interplay between policy and practice and are committed to policies that enhance services to diverse clientele. And at the very last stage in the continuum is cultural proficiency. And this is characterized by holding culture in high esteem. Culturally proficient agencies seek to add to the knowledge base of culturally competent practice by conducting research, developing new therapeutic approaches based on culture, and publishing and disseminating the results of demonstration projects. Culturally proficient agencies hire staff who are specialists in cultural competent practice. Such agencies advocate for cultural competence throughout the system and for improved relations between cultures and throughout society.
This
Crystal, do you
continuum
have
was
an
adapted
example of
from
one of these,
Cross et al.'s
levels
Towards
from
a
your own
Culturally
experience
Competent
that you
System
want
of
to share?
Care, Volume 1, published by
I appreciate that question.
CASSP,
I think
Technical
about the
Assistance
cultural
Center, Center for
capacity
Child Health and
agencies
Mental
in the
Health
time
Policy,
I was in
Georgetown
care who may
University,
be
Child
presented
Development
as
Center.
white and not speaking the quote unquote Colombian dialect, and how that did affect my time in care and just how I was perceived, and felt that I had to prove myself that I was an actual Hispanic person. So I welcome your thoughts as well, Madison.
For me, I felt what was a sense of cultural destructiveness. And through my entry into care, while English is not my first language, although surprising to some, Vietnamese is. And when I entered my foster care placements, I was often reminded that it was not appropriate for me to practice or speak my native tongue. And for that reason, I've lost a lot of my ability to speak my native tongue to the point where today I had to call a friend to check that I am pronouncing things correctly. And that is an experience that still follows me today, even though I have been far removed from the system. So with that, Crystal's going to drop in a resource that is kind of a quick summary of this cultural competency continuum. And we're going to be starting a poll to kind of gauge from you all where you would place your organization on the cultural competency continuum. We understand that folks will be at different places. And this is a really important starting place to really assess how you can move from one level to the next. Rachel, will you please start the poll for us? All right. So I don't know if the poll has been queued, but if folks want to just, we want to make sure that we can do the poll so this way folks can answer anonymously. But if not, let's go ahead and move on. You'll have a chance to kind of talk about this in the breakout, so we don't want to further delay. Actually, it looks like folks have responded to their polling questions. I see so far 54% of those who are participating on today's call have noted they are currently at cultural pre-competence. So waiting to see additional numbers coming in. Continue to answer the polls if you're seeing them. 24% noted that they're at the place of cultural competence. That's good. So and this is math, 78% of folks are really at stage 4 and 5 of this process. Right. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Crystal for some final definitions before we go into our breakout.
Perfect, thanks, Madison. A couple of definitions that we wanted to walk you all through. Number one is cultural awareness, and cultural awareness is having sensitivity to the similarities and differences that exist between two different cultures, and the use of this sensitivity in effective communication with members of another cultural group. And the second one is cultural humility. So cultural humility involves examining your own values, beliefs, experiences, and biases through self-reflection and lifelong inquiry, and being curious and open to learning about clients' values, beliefs, and experiences in order to develop mutual understanding, successful partnerships, and cultural safety. A cultural humility perspective requires making a commitment to lifelong learning, exercising self-reflection and critique, and being comfortable with not knowing, and recognizing the dynamics of power and privilege.
And last set of definitions, I promise there will not be a vocabulary test. It's just really getting us grounded in the same definition. Our two concepts, one around cultural safety and one around cultural responsiveness. And some of these definitions are actually pulled from Australia, where they actually have a lot of conversations about cultural awareness and humility. Cultural safety is defined as cultural unsafe practices involve any actions that diminish, demean, or disempower the cultural identity and well-being of an individual. And creating a culturally safe practice involves working to create a safe space that is sensitive and responsive to a client's social, political, linguistic, economic, and spiritual realities. Ultimately, adopting a cultural humility perspective or being culturally responsive requires us to have the ability to understand cultural differences, recognize potential biases, and look beyond differences to work productively with children, families, and communities whose cultural contexts are different from our own. And this includes being able to be respectful and effectively working with folks of all backgrounds, cultures, languages, classes, races, ethnic backgrounds, disabilities, religions, gender, sexual orientation, and any other diversity factor that in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values their worth.
Thank you, Madison. So I want to give you all a little bit of context as we prepare to be able to go into our breakout rooms. So you are about to be broken up into small groups. You will have the ability to unmute yourself and come on video. Please do so. Feel free to use this as some time to be able to reflect on your own, but it would be good to be able to engage in conversation with your peers. Just pick one of the two reflection prompts that are on the screen to discuss in your small group. Not everyone needs to address the same point. Feel free to adjust what's sitting home to you. If you all feel like you're in a good place, spend time writing your responses to the action question and share if time allows. And when we get back, we will ask for folks to be able to share their action step into the chat. Just because of time purposes, I want to be able to turn it over to Alan to be able to give his thoughts on any of these questions before we move into breakouts.
Small group
you, Kristen.
discussion questions.
So yeah,
1.
we move into breakouts,
Reflection.
we discuss these
What is your
questions. Like just an
culture, and
example,
how does it influence the way
I
you
would share
view
if I was
and
in a
interact with
breakout room.
others? 2.
Crystal just
Action. How
demonstrated
can I
is that
use my understanding of my
growing
own
up in
and
our
others'
culture, one
cultures
thing I learned
to
was that
enhance
we were kind of
cultural responsiveness
non-confrontational
and
people.
safety
So
in my
when we were
engagement with
planning for
people
this
with
kind of
lived
webinar, it was
experience,
like I had to
communities,
make sure
and
Crystal and
tribes?
Madison that I
3.
needed to be
Reflection.
invited to talk.
What is your
If
organizational
I wasn't
culture,
invited,
and how
I
does
just
that
wasn't gonna
impact
jump
how
in.
your
So
organization
that
interacts,
invitation to
views,
talk kind of
and
reminded me
shares
of our
power with others?
native, we have
4.
circles where we pass a
Action.
feather,
What can I
to
do in the
return
next
the
90
talk.
days
So that's
to
just an
ensure the
example
systems
of
that
how
I am a part
culture
of a
the
move
way that you're
toward
gonna
greater
interact with other
inclusion
people.
and
So
equity?
hopefully you guys will come
How
up with
can
some
I
really
move
good
them
ones in your
to the
small
next
groups.
level on the cultural competency continuum?
Thanks, Alan. So I'm going to go ahead and open your breakouts, and you'll be in there for about 10 minutes before I bring you back to the larger group.
Group Reflections. Madison Sandoval Lund.
Welcome back, everybody. Thanks. I hope that your breakout groups were really helpful in learning about other people's cultures and how folks interact with others. I welcome folks to post whatever it is that they learned in the chat so we can see what you took away. And at the same time, we also welcome folks to, if they're able, to share what their thoughts are as far as what are some next steps that you can engage in to enhance your cultural practice and being responsive. With that, I'm going to turn us to the final slide, which is just our closing statements. I'm going to, Crystal, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Madison. Some of just the final thoughts for me, and when it comes to, my culture and the impact that it has on, how people view me and how I view the world, and, how that kind of correlates with just my life, right? Just the aspect, and I've seen it in the chat come up a few times where, when I grew up in a Hispanic household, it was like kids are seen but not heard, right? So now when I go out into the world and I work directly with young people, making sure that I'm keeping that in mind, that I'm not protruding that kind of, expectation from when I was younger in my culture onto the young people in the system that I am working with, and then the same aspect I think about, I saw a couple of people say it as well, the aspect of, what happens home stays home. So when we go and, we're working for child welfare and we're going into our young people's homes as caseworkers and system changes and advocates, and we're telling them to be able to tell us what's going on, that we could help and we could be there for them, really being mindful of their culture and how sometimes that could have instilled to them, what happens home stays home. And I'm really not able to talk about that and the impact and the dynamic that could have. And I guess maybe the last thing that I would add is just really identity. Growing up in my beginning stages of in a Hispanic household, there was a lot of big conversations on what identity should and should not be, right? So me going out into the world now, really being mindful on how that could impact my perception of the world. So those are just like my final part, my final thoughts with you all. Everything's not what meets the eye, right? I present to you as a white individual here today, but I am Hispanic. So I think that's something to be able to keep in mind when we're thinking about stereotypes and being culturally competent. So I appreciate you all for being here, and I'll pass it over to Alan for his final thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, just really quick. So I did get to bounce around a couple of break rooms, and I really appreciate people that seem to come understand that people with lived experience have a lot to share. So get those people involved in your committees and boards and stuff like that. But the really big thing, I just have to, because I work for the National Native Children's Trauma Center, just really promote this idea that learn what you can about what we call trauma-informed care. Because even though it's been a very long time, historical trauma still plays such a huge role in our tribal communities and nations. And, by learning about how trauma affects a person, you can just work so much better with particularly our Native people. So there's a lot out there on trauma-informed care. Do what you can to learn. And this has just been an honor to be able to share my personal stories and talk to a few people. So miigwech, Madison.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks, Crystal, and thank you all for being a part of this Planning for Action session. We hope that you all learned a lot and took away a lot, and spend a moment in reflection. This is definitely not the end all be all of this is, if anything, just the start of your journey in becoming more culturally competent, but also building in that humility. I wanted to take a moment and share a couple of reflections. I wanted to start with quoting a famous Vietnamese monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, who says, "For things to reveal themselves to us, we need to be ready to abandon our views about them." And I think that that's a really good place to start for me, in really understanding that I don't know everything, and that when I'm in this moment in time with somebody else, I need to take the moment and share this space and engage with them equally as a human that is worth of dignity and respect. And that we're often taught from a young age the golden rule: treat others how you like to be treated. But I think ultimately, when we're talking about this, is about the platinum rule, which is treat others how they'd like to be treated. And that begins with having a conversation with other people about and really getting to a place of understanding. My kiddo was in school, and they learned the 7 habits of effective leaders. And it's one of the habits is seek first to understand and then to be understood. Last but not least, last cliche on the books, which is, all of this work is really hard, it's really difficult. And we really thank you all for taking the time to be here with us today, and your commitment to children, youth, and families, and that it's about progress and not perfection. And so we hope that you always continuously seek to grow and learn, and get to meet amazing people like your colleagues in your sessions today. So with that, we are at time. We hope you enjoy the rest of your session. Thank you and goodbye.
Child Welfare Virtual Expo logo.